Hello everybody. How's everyone doing today? It's Monday, October 4th. Facebook is down, and so I thought, well, I'll make a YouTube video. I haven't made one in a while. I have a few people who've been asking me on my Facebook page for my YouTube link, and I've given it to a few people. I was very reluctant to do that at first because I feared I have this overwhelming fear of just talking about this. It took me so long to even start talking about my relationship with this man, and now that so much time has passed, I feel more comfortable talking about it with a wider audience, even though I still do stay anonymous to a certain extent. When I first started talking on YouTube about this, and I've told this to people before, so I know people are tired of hearing me repeat myself, but it was because one day I had talked to him, and this was years after the discard. A year would go by, he'd show up, he'd disappear. A few months later, he'd start texting, and so on. It took me about 2 years from the time from the time that our relationship ended, to start figuring out that there was something about him, that there was some behavior in him that made me feel worse about myself each time that I would speak to him. Each time I would be around him, I would feel worse about myself. I would feel lower. I would feel blamed. I would feel guilt. Just all these horrible emotions. And one day, he was, and keep in mind, at the time I didn't know about any of these adjectives or definitions of these words. One day he starts triangulating me with someone who I cared about, a friend of mine, someone who I trusted beyond anybody else, and I knew he was lying. And some people might say, well, you never do know about some people. Some people will be shady behind your back. No, I had full trust that he was lying. I knew he was lying. It sickened me to hear him saying the things that he was. And I called him out on it. I called his bluff. I led him to believe that I was going to confront this person, which I had no intentions of doing. And I didn't know about narcissism then, for all of you who are saying you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't interact with a narcissist. I know that now. But at that time, I just wanted to see what his reaction would be, because I knew that he was full of it, And when I walked away that day and I stopped talking to him that day, as the day wore on, I became more and more just disturbed by it. And I just kept thinking, what is it about him that makes him want to say those types of things about people who've done nothing to him, probably wouldn't know him if they walked by him, and yet he's out here telling me that they're trying to hook up with him, that they're trying to get together with him, and I knew it was not right. This person would have had no, other than maybe passing him in a grocery store or something of that nature, she would have had no time that she would have been around him. And she does not have social media either, so it wasn't anything like that. But I remember as the last part of that conversation, and I'm calling him out on it, and I'm like, well, I should talk to her and find out what's going on, why she would feel the need to do that. And he's just like, no, you don't want to do that. And then he starts this fake laughter, this kind of like this smarmy, fake, I got you kind of laughter, like he was just playing me to see my reaction. And he was, basically, because that's what narcissists do. But what he didn't know was that I could see through him at that point. I didn't know what it was I was seeing, but I knew I was seeing something. And as the day went on, the more I thought about it, I just sit there and I just was online and I typed in people with fake laughs. And I don't remember what the very first link was that came up, but as I'm reading through the different links that come up, it's all about narcissism. And I start reading, and I click on WebMD, and I click on all these other different ones, and I'm like, that's him, that's him. They're explaining it, they're describing this man to me. They're explaining what I've seen and witnessed and been through. And I got a link to a YouTube video, and I wish I could even remember who it was, because I would love to give them the credit for being the very first person to bring my awareness to it. And I sit there and I watch that video, and I watch another one, and I watch another one, and they're mostly like psychologist type people. Then I stumble upon some regular everyday people who are just sitting there talking. And I start reading the comments. And the comments is what woke me up. Those people were describing, I read some and I'm like, are they talking about him? You know, because it was so similar, and it was just like the same exact behavior. And the same exact mannerisms, and the same exact treatment. Not only of me, but of other people around me, other people in his life. And the damaging behavior and the lies. Oh my gosh. I could do an entire playlist of nothing but lies that he told me. And recently, about within the last year, I stumbled upon this woman's page on Facebook. And I started watching her. It was just a fluke. I just stumbled upon her through somebody else had made a comment on her page or something, an awareness page, and I started watching. And as I'm watching her behavior and the way she's talking and the way she's dry begging and the behavior and the attitude, it triggered a memory. It triggered something in me. So one day I pick up my phone and I just start talking about narcissism all over again. Now let me backtrack just a little bit. Before I discovered her on Facebook, probably within 3 or 4 months, maybe 6 months of my very first video I watched about narcissism on YouTube, I started making my own videos. And I was very tight-lipped. I was holding close to the vest. I wasn't opening up and revealing a lot of details. And I regret that because, but at the time I was still so new to it, and I was still learning about it, and I wasn't fully understanding of it, just how damaging and dangerous these people really are. So I'm telling my story, and I sit on the video for a while. I don't release it. I don't publish it on YouTube. Some time goes by, he shows back up again. And at this point, this was my very first Hoover after learning about narcissism. And I made the rookie mistake that most rookies make of thinking that I could see it in him and like catch him in it, you know. But they're so skilled that they realize when you're starting to get on to them. They realize when you're starting to figure them out. They change their course. They change their behavior just enough to kind of give you that doubt. Now, I want to make people aware of something. I was not in constant contact with this man. It wasn't like a year went by and he showed up and we were just back to our old ways. No. I was trying to put my life back together after the destruction that he left me with, the financial burden that he left me with, the emotional embarrassment and shame and humiliation, and just feeling like I had been scammed. Feeling like, you know, I don't know, like a deer in headlights or something. I don't know how to explain it. I wish I was more skilled in the psychological jargon of how to explain what took place. But I just talk. I just turn my phone on and just tell what I think and what I feel and what I remember about it. I'm just a regular person who just went through a narcissistic, abusive relationship. But I think if they're being honest, I think most people will say that they probably gave in and spoke with the narcissist after they figured it out, and and maybe they did it because they wanted to do the same thing I did, was try to see if you could glimpse it and watch the behavior and then say, oh yeah, that's triangulation, that's devaluing. And he would show up, talk for a while, and then he would disappear, and I wouldn't hear from him for a few months. Well, the last year that I actually had contact with him, he showed up, and narcissists are very nostalgic. I've talked about this. They use birth dates, they use anniversary dates, they use dates of any kind of special event, a wedding anniversary if you are married to them, the date of birth of a child or children. Anything that would trigger a memory in you and would kind of put you back associate you to the better times with them when they were first, starting this relationship with you, and everything in your mind was still grand. And they will use old songs, and they will use just anything to memorialize the better, happier times. And that's what he would do. He would show up at times when it would have been an anniversary or some memory of something good between us. And I had started making my videos. I had been making them for a couple of months at that point, but I was still kind of holding them, and I wasn't really publishing them. And then I did, and I started very slowly publishing my playlist, but I was still not being real open about it. I wasn't going into a lot of nitty-gritty details, but I did. And there are some videos in my playlist that may be a little graphic, and I do have my channel set for no children. Not that I get nitty-gritty, but just a little bit graphic in some videos. And then I made a whole bunch of videos that were just random thoughts, just me talking about narcissism in general and how they treat you and the different feelings that you go through and the recovery process. And right now, a lot of those videos on my channel are still private, but I've been considering opening them back up, and maybe one at a time, just to kind of, not like overwhelm myself. It's been several years since I have had any contact with him or have heard from him at all. And the only reason that I'm revisiting this and talking about this is, like I said, recently I found this woman's page online, and it triggered me remembering the things I started figuring out about him. I mean, I would watch her and I would say, well, that's just exactly the way he acted. Now, the people that come over to my YouTube channel from my Facebook know who I'm talking about, and they know that she's loud and threatening and lies and just cries and just, the behavior of like a 8-year-old child that doesn't get their way. Emotional stunt, just the manipulation of people through like temper tantrums and threats and grandiose fantasy of being something important, and putting people in their place. Now, he was kind of the opposite. He was more laid back and observant. He wasn't one to threaten verbally or lash out. He was really laid back and quiet. And when you knew that he was kind of angry, or you knew that he was kind of in a mood where he didn't like get his way, he would become ghost. He would ghost. He would become quiet. He would become like hump up. I call it like he would hump up like a bullfrog. Just kind of turn his back and be kind of like defiant. So he wasn't the same as her, but they had similar traits. She reminded me so much of that time in my life. And I'm glad that I was able to reach a new audience to talk about narcissism. And I hope that anything that I've talked about either here on YouTube or Facebook has opened somebody's eyes up. And maybe it will bring them to these other videos, these other channels that are more skilled at talking about this. I just talk about it from my personal experience. And like I said, I left out some of the darker behaviors and some of the darker things that I went through myself. And it took me years. I mean, sexual abuse. I don't want to get too graphic here, but when you hear the words sexual abuse, you think of a child being molested or someone being sold into sex trafficking or something like that. You don't think of it in terms of a male-female couple relationship. And I didn't even think of it that way at the time, but later, looking back on it, and I, you know, when you look back on a sexual relationship with a partner, it should remind you of the better times. It should make you remember how good you felt being with that person and touching them and kissing them and all that stuff. But when you look back on it and it makes you cringe a little bit, makes you feel kind of like embarrassed, even though you're just thinking it in your mind and you're not saying it out loud. It still makes you feel a little bit embarrassed over the way that they treated you, and you kind of went along with it just because you didn't want to appear to be a cold prude or whatever. Yeah, it's damaging. It takes a while to figure it out. I didn't even know it. It was years after the relationship ended, and it dawned on me one day as I'm reading and listening to these videos on YouTube, and people are talking about being in relationships with people, narcissists who were pornography addicts. And here's the thing about sex with a narcissist: they're very sexually they're interested in sex, but they lose interest in their partners really early, really quickly. They will continue to use your body for their own needs, but they don't have any interest in you as a romantic, loving partner in the bedroom. After a while, it just becomes abusive, or it becomes nothing at all, which is also abusive, because especially when you're in this new, early, young relationship, and you're still exploring each other, and then all of a sudden they're cold to you, and they're just like, no, I don't feel like right now, you know, and like 2 days earlier you're going at each other, you know, not to get graphic here, but they just turn it off like a faucet, and you're left sitting there wondering, did I do something wrong? You feel like you feel rejected, and you feel like you're not pleasing to them. And I may talk a little bit more about that later. I don't want this video to run on any longer than it has, but I'm going to start making some videos more here on YouTube than Facebook, because the channel that I have, or the page rather, that I have on Facebook focuses more on that one particular person, and I regret that most of my videos are about her, because narcissism was my subject matter to begin with. She just kind of ended up being kind of like a description, or a role, I don't want to say role model, not a role model at all, but just kind of like the case study of narcissism. And so I'm going to get back and talk a little bit more on a personal level about my own experience with it and how I overcame it, and how I hope that just the videos that I make, which they haven't reached a very big audience at all, but if it reaches one person and helps that person to kind of work through their own feelings about it, then it's worth it. And I appreciate anybody who takes the time to listen.